This is BBC. Ben Brown, the headlines at 9. MPs warn that cuts to the Royal Marines and their amphibious assault ships would significantly undermine Britain's security. And they say the Treasury should cough up more money.
If there are new and intensified threats, you would think we would be adding to our capabilities, not deleting one of our world-beating star capabilities.
A senior pro-Brexit Conservative accuses ministers of being vague and divided in their strategy for leaving the European Union. Ice hockey players from a unified North and South Korean team play together for the first time ahead of the Winter Olympics. The actress Uma Thurman breaks her silence on an alleged attack by Harvey Weinstein. Also this hour, we'll be taking a look at this morning's front pages of the papers, including reports that the Spice Girls want to play at Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's wedding. And after Wales's comprehensive defeat of Scotland yesterday, England prepare to take on Italy in the Six Nations. Hello, good morning and welcome to BBC News. A group of MPs are warning that cuts to the Royal Marines would rip the heart out of one of Britain's elite fighting forces. The government has reportedly been considering axing thousands of Marines and getting rid of 2 warships which they use to launch beach landings. The Defence Select Committee says the cuts would be militarily illiterate. Daniela Ralph has this report.
The training, known for being tough and arduous. 6,500 Royal Marines go through it to make them amongst Britain's elite fighting forces, known for their versatility and their ability to respond quickly to situations around the world. The Royal Marines also provide up to half the personnel for the UK Special Forces. The Defence Select Committee report warns that further cuts to the Marines would damage their ability to be a high readiness unit, quickly deployable, often in difficult circumstances. It also criticises plans to end the use of HMS Albion, as the ship from which beach assaults are made.
If there are new and intensified threats, you would think we would be adding to our capabilities, not deleting one of our world-beating star capabilities.
The committee praises the Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson for taking control of the Defence Review, but again warn he won't be able to prevent harsh cuts without extra funding from the Treasury. The Ministry of Defence says that protecting the UK is its priority and stressed that the Royal Marines play a vital role in defending the country. Daniela Ralph, BBC News.
Well, you saw him briefly in that report. We can hear more now from Julian Lewis, who's chair of that Defence Select Committee. He's in Westminster. Thank you very much for being with us. Why are you so worried about cuts then to the Marines?
Because the capability that they offer is absolutely central to any coherent strategic concept to be able to intervene effectively in any theatre of war that may be necessary in any conflict that could arise in the future, because we won't know in advance where or what it's going to be. This is the only way that you can land large numbers of troops effectively with heavy equipment from the sea at a point on an enemy coastline where we're not talking about storming the D-Day beaches, where in fact they don't know you're coming ashore, and the first thing they know about it is you are ashore and you're there with heavy equipment.
Well, what do you see as the principal threats then to this country militarily? People talk about North Korea and so on. Are Marines really much use in that sort of potential conflict?
Well, the answer, I'm afraid, is that this is to make the classic mistake of assuming that we have to configure our forces according to any particular present-day snapshot of current threats. We have to provide a whole spectrum of capability, ranging from deterring nuclear blackmail at one end to cyber warfare at the other. And the reality is that, as was projected 20 years ago when the Defence Review promoted the idea of a movable sea base to be able to exert force in any theatre, it has to have two elements. The ability to exert air power from the sea, hence the two aircraft carriers that we now have, and the ability to exert land power from the sea, and that is where the Albion and the Bullock are absolutely indispensable.
Isn't the real reality, if you like, that, you know, we're living in tough economic times, we've got a lot of competing demands for government expenditure. We've got, for example, a national health service that many people say is in crisis. We can't afford everything, and yes, it would be nice to have lots of Royal Marines, but we just maybe can't afford as many as we have right now.
You've now got to the heart of the issue, because what you have to ask yourself is defence sufficiently high up in our scale of competing national priorities? Now, in the 1980s, the last time we faced an assertive Russia coupled with a major terrorist threat, in that case in Northern Ireland, we were spending not barely 2% of GDP on defence as we do now, but between 4.5% and 5% of GDP on defence, a similar amount to education and health. We now spend 2.5 times on education what we spend on defence, and we spend 4 times on health what we spend on defence. Even after the end of the Cold War, and we took the peace dividend cuts, by the mid-1990s, long after the Cold War finished, we were not spending barely 2% as at present, we were spending fully 3% of GDP on defence. That's still a lot less than we're spending on health, education and welfare, and we have to aim to get back to that sort of level of priority.
And Julian Lewis, I know you're talking to us with your hat, if I may say so, as chair of the Defence
Not
Select
through my
Committee.
hat.
We love your hat, it's fantastic.
Good.
And your regimental tie as well.
Well, this is not my regiment, but it is the Port and Maritime Regiment at Marchwood in my New Forest East constituency that supplies heavy equipment for far-off theatre engagements.
OK, well, I'm glad you clarified that for us. With your hat as a Conservative MP, can I ask you also about Brexit?
Certainly.
And the continuing pressure on your Prime Minister? Does she have your loyal support?
She does have my loyal support, provided that she remains true to two things that she was the first person to say, at least that I heard say them. The first was that Brexit means Brexit, which is not a tautology. It is actually a recognition that there will be attempts to neuter it, dissolve it, dilute it, till it's Brexit in name only. So if she sticks to that, then she has my support. And secondly, equally importantly, if she sticks to the position that no deal is better than a bad deal, because to bring it back to defence, when you're in arms control negotiations, sometimes you have to be prepared to walk away from the table, and then you get people coming back and negotiating seriously. In this case, rather than accept a bad deal from the EU, we should walk away from it all. We should trade with the EU like we do with other countries, and you know what? Within a year or two they'd be back at the table and we'd be getting the best possible deal negotiated.
Great to talk to you. Thank you very much. Talking to us with both your hats. Julian Lewis, the chair of the Defence Select Committee. Many thanks.
Bye-bye.
Well, a senior Conservative MPs accused ministers of being vague and divided over Brexit. This was Bernard Jenkin, who was on the board of the official Leave campaign, who said that civil servants deserved an unambiguous and united direction from ministers, and singled out the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, for criticism. It comes ahead of key ministerial meetings this week on the UK-EU relationship. Let's discuss this with our political correspondent, Susanna Endonson. Susanna, the Chancellor's become a bit of a hate figure, really, for some of the Brexiteers, hasn't he?
Yeah, many of them blame him for, I suppose, not singing from the same hymn sheet as they see the Prime Minister singing from. You know, the Prime Minister's talked about there being no customs union after Brexit, and they want that to be the case. And what they're saying about Philip Hammond, and certainly in Bernard Jenkins' criticism, he's basically saying that Philip Hammond, the Prime Minister talks about one policy and Philip Hammond talks about another policy, and he's basically saying that Mr Hammond needs to stick to collective ministerial responsibility on this issue. So he's very much become this kind of figure that they see. Of course, Philip Hammond was a Remainer, so he's become this figure that they see as perhaps not pushing in the same direction as they'd like to see Brexit go. Now, there's been a lot of criticism about the Treasury this week, not just from Bernard Jenkins, but also we had Jacob Rees-Mogg just a couple of days ago talking about how he sees the Treasury civil service acting against the direction that he'd like to see Brexit going in, and basically suggesting that the civil service was painting Brexit to be, you know, a kind of a worse outcome than it needs to be. He used the phrase "fiddling the figures" yesterday, and so that's been criticised. There's been a lot of backlash from the union that represents civil servants, basically saying that those are just unsubstantiated conspiracy theories. But certainly, it's a sense really of just that kind of, I suppose, the tense atmosphere within the Conservative Party at the moment, certainly on those backbenches where you've got a lot of Brexiteers who want to see the direction of travel change. We've talked about it time and again, that they're concerned that Brexit may be in name only, and so that's certainly, I suppose, Bernard Jenkins' comments today is really just feeding into that sense that we're getting on the backbenches.
Susanna, where are we with various meetings and talks on Brexit? I think people probably get a bit confused as to where we are on all of that. Just tell us what's happening in the next few days.
We've got key meetings this week. We've got Michel Barnier, who is David Davis's opposite number in the EU, coming to Britain. He's going to be meeting with the Prime Minister, meeting with David Davis, and so that's a key moment really, because it's about moving those discussions on to the next stage in the relationship between Britain and Europe, and basically talking about the transition period and the next step. And in addition to that, there's going to be key ministerial meetings throughout the week behind the scenes, looking more at the technical details. So it is about taking Brexit on, and so, you know, all of this briefing, I suppose, in the national newspapers over the weekend is in part ahead of that, to add pressure onto the Prime Minister. Of course, she had pressure when she was in China just a few days ago. People want to be very clear about where she stands. She said that, you know, she has been clear about that Britain's leaving the EU, but they want to know what direction that's going to be taken in, and certainly in terms of the negotiations, we're moving on to that next step now.
OK, Susanna, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Susanna Mendonça there, our political correspondent. The Prime Minister is expected to announce plans to make it an offence under electoral law to intimidate parliamentary candidates and their campaigners. In a speech later this week, Mrs May will say recent cases of politicians being abused in the street and online risk toxifying public debate. Sinn Féin has confirmed that Gerry Kelly, its police spokesman and a Northern Ireland Assembly member, removed a wheel clamp from his car in Belfast. Footage emerged on social media, which appeared to show a pair of bolt cutters lying beside the vehicle. Sinn Féin spokesman said Mr Kelly's solicitor was dealing with the matter. An Olympic ice hockey team comprising players from both North and South Korea is competing for the first time today. The all-women's team are taking on Sweden in a friendly match before the start of the Winter Olympics next week. North Korea's participation is being seen as a show of reconciliation with the South. Here's our Seoul correspondent, Laura Bicker, with more.
This is the first time the public will get a chance to see the South Korean inter-Korean hockey team play. It's come after a lot of controversy here in South Korea. There was a feeling, certainly amongst a lot of young people, that the South Korean government had jeopardised this women's hockey team's chances at its own Olympics, and they were using these players as a political pawn to try to encourage North Korea to take part in talks to reduce its nuclear weapons programme. So there was certainly a feeling that the South Korean government had not consulted on this, had not spoken to the women's hockey players before deciding on a joint team. Now, we're told that the team will work on a roster, that everyone will get their shot. There are 12 members from North Korea, and the Unification Ministry has issued pictures of the two sides, North and South, getting to know one another and even celebrating a birthday in a bid to try to calm the controversy. I think many eyes will be on the game today to see how the two sides have managed to match up and managed to play together over the last week. Meanwhile, other athletes, 10 athletes from North Korea, have arrived in the athletes' village in Pyeongchang. The North Korean flag is now flying in South Korea, which is a very rare sight indeed. And in fact, hoisting the North Korean flag in South Korea is usually a crime, but an exception is being made in this case. Meanwhile, North Korea is continuing with its plans to hold a large military parade on the day before the opening ceremony of the Olympics. They're saying, certainly from Pyongyang, that no one has a right to interfere in its plans.
Laura Bicker reporting. The International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach has described the decision to overturn the lifetime bans of 28 Russian athletes found guilty of doping as extremely disappointing. On Thursday, the Court of Arbitration for Sport upheld the athletes' appeals, ruling that there was insufficient evidence that they had benefited from a system of state-sponsored doping at the 2014 Winter Games, which were held in Russia. Speaking at a press conference, Mr. Bach said that the IOC will look to appeal against the decision.
We unfortunately do only know about the reasons from the very few sentences in a press release, because so far the panel was not able to deliver a reasoned decision, which we are eagerly waiting for, and we have asked the CAS to speed this procedure up. We have been told that this could be end of February, which is an extremely unsatisfactory situation.
And our latest headlines on BBC News 16 minutes past 9. MPs warn that cuts to the Royal Marines would leave Britain's global interests at serious risk. Senior Brexiteer accuses ministers of being vague and divided in their plans for leaving the European Union. A joint North and South Korea ice hockey team play together for the first time ahead of the Winter Olympics. The aviation watchdog is to investigate airlines' seating practices. It comes after accusations that flight operators are deliberately splitting up groups of passengers so they pay extra to then sit together. Well, the Civil Aviation Authority says passengers are paying as much as £400 million each year to be reallocated, and 1 in 10 did not know that they would incur an extra cost to sit with their group. Police in Florida have arrested a man they say made threats to kidnap the singer Lana Del Rey. The man was carrying a knife when he was arrested near the Amway Center in Orlando, where the singer was due to perform. Michael Hunt, who's 43, is facing charges of aggravated stalking and attempted kidnapping with a weapon. The Hollywood actress Uma Thurman has claimed that the disgraced film producer Harvey Weinstein tried to sexually assault her in a London hotel. The star made the detailed accusations in a newspaper interview. Mr. Weinstein's lawyer said his client was stunned and saddened by what he considered false allegations. It comes as Scotland Yard confirms it's looking into 2 more allegations of sexual assault against the producer. Our correspondent Simon Jones has more.
She starred in several films produced by the disgraced movie mogul. It was after the success of Pulp Fiction that Uma Thurman says she was targeted by Harvey Weinstein. Now she's the latest woman to speak out in an interview with the New York Times. Uma Thurman claims Harvey Weinstein pushed her down when she met him in his suite here at the Savoy Hotel in London. She says he tried to expose himself. He did all kinds of unpleasant things, but she says she managed to wriggle away like a lizard. The next day, she says, a bunch of flowers arrived. A spokeswoman for Harvey Weinstein said in a statement, Mr. Weinstein acknowledges making an awkward pass 25 years ago at Miss Thurman in England after misreading her signals after a flirtatious exchange in Paris, for which he immediately apologised and deeply regrets. However, her claims about being physically assaulted are untrue. It comes as Scotland Yard say they've received 2 further allegations of sexual assault, one from a woman who claims Harvey Weinstein assaulted her in Westminster in 2011, and another from a woman who says she was targeted in the Republic of Ireland. That brings the total number of women who've reported the producer to British police to 9. Officers in New York and Los Angeles have also begun investigations. He has denied all allegations of non-consensual sex. Harvey Weinstein was once one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, credited with scores of Oscar wins. But he's been thrown out of the organisation that runs the Oscars, and he's now in rehab, a huge fall from grace from which there is likely to be no return. Simon Jones, BBC News.
Research suggests that regular churchgoers are more likely to support immigration than people who regard themselves as Christian but don't attend services. The study of data from the British Social Attitude Survey has been carried out by Bristol University for BBC Local Radio. Graham Satchell reports.
Sausages, bacon and a warm welcome. This is the Anglican Church of the Martyrs in Leicester. It's open to everyone, families, students, homeless people, migrants. Jane has been helping out here for more than a decade.
For me, I think it is part of my faith that is to serve and to encourage people and to help people. Some people leave their own country, not out of choice, but because they have to. As a Christian, it's about being welcoming to the stranger.
Evanice, just one migrant who's been warmly welcomed. She came to Britain from Zimbabwe 16 years ago.
I found the same Christian principles of loving your neighbor as yourself is what they hold dear. So it was easy for them to welcome me because of their Christian faith.
So surprising then that the vast majority of people who describe themselves as Church of England are opposed to immigration. Researchers at the University of Bristol analysed a series of British social attitude surveys. They found that 87% of Anglicans think the number of immigrants coming to Britain should be reduced. It compares with 77% of people who say the same thing with no religion. Church leaders say they have work to do.
We don't have a great history in this country, in the Church of England, of having welcomed immigrants way back since the 50s and 60s. And we still have a long way to go in order to enable, to help, to educate congregations to be able to express a more fuller welcome to those who both enter our churches and also come to our country.
The study also found a difference between those who go to church every week and those who call themselves Christian but don't go to church. 66% who regularly go to church say migrant numbers should be reduced, whereas it's 86% for those who say they're Christian but never attend.
The Church of England, you know, you go to some of them and it feels like a branch meeting of Momentum in some cases.
David Curtin is a UKIP member of the London Assembly. He's still a committed Christian but stopped going to church after the EU referendum.
I was quite shocked at one point because the vicar of the church actually was against Brexit, and he started using the pulpit to preach against Brexit. And for people like me, you think, well, it's not so much that I've left the church, but perhaps the church has left me.
But aren't Christians meant to love your neighbour as yourself? I mean, that's the Christian message.
But that doesn't mean that you support rapid mass immigration.
Back in Leicester, breakfast is still going strong. So is it possible to be a Christian and to be opposed to immigration? Richard Worsfold is the vicar here.
Intellectually, I'm sure it's possible for people to make an argument for that. Whether I would accept that argument is another matter.
There are complex arguments here about cultural attitudes, Christian teaching, politics, the difference between economic migrants and refugees. But if the surveys are right, there remains a huge disconnect between the hierarchy in the church and the majority of its congregation. Graham Satchell, BBC News.
Let's get more now on our top story today. That warning from MPs that proposed cuts to the Royal Marines are militarily illiterate. We can speak to Lord West, former head of the Royal Navy and former Security Minister as well, who's with me now in the studio. Thank you so much for being with us. Do you think there is a real threat to the Royal Marines in terms of cuts?
I think there is a real risk, yes. Quite clearly there is insufficient money within the defence budget, and each service will have been told to go away and look at measures that can be taken. And the bracket within the Navy that's being looked at to make those sort of savings would involve the paying off of the landing ship docks, these are the Albion and Bulwark, which are crucial to an amphibious landing, and a reduction in the Marines. Because if you don't have the amphibious shipping and capability, there's no point really in having a large Marine force. But that amphibious capability has taken many years to build up, and you can't just suddenly create it again. It is strategically illiterate, as the Defence Committee said.
Although some people would say, you know, if you look at what are perhaps arguably the biggest military threats at the moment to this country, maybe North Korea, would Royal Marines be much use in that sort of conflict?
Well, I think in the North Korean one, although in the Korean War, of course, amphibious landing was one of the key things during that war because it's on a peninsula, in the initial stages, clearly it wouldn't. I mean, the sort of fighting would be pretty catastrophic, I think, and let's hope a war doesn't start there. But when one looks at the globe, there are lots and lots of diverse threats, and anything we do from our country is almost by definition expeditionary. We have to be, because we're an island, we have to be expeditionary. And the amphibious capability with the carrier strike capability and our nuclear attack submarines means we have a force that can enable us to join allies and deploy globally, and that's important because we rely on global trade. We've got 14 dependencies worldwide. We saw what happened in the Falklands, for example, and we run global shipping from London. You know, we need that stability.
Falklands was a one-off quite a long time ago, wasn't it?
Well, each war is always a one-off. That's the thing. I mean, we don't know what will happen tomorrow. And there's no doubt the amphibious capability for an island nation is very, very important militarily.
Some people would say, yes, nice to have, you know, a large Royal Marines fighting force, but at the same time you can't have everything. These are difficult times economically. There are a lot of demands on government expenditure. The National Health Service, for example, many people say in crisis, we just can't afford to do everything.
I found from my time in government that governments can afford to do the things they believe are important. And government after government keeps saying the most important duty of any government is the defence and security of our nation and British people globally. And I'm afraid successive governments have cut and cut and cut. This hasn't happened to other forces. And since 2010, already our military capability has been reduced by a third. If they take the measures like the amphibious shipping and the others they're talking about, our capability will have been cut by a half. Can you imagine if since 2010 we'd cut our hospitals, we had half the number of hospitals? It would be just mind-boggling. And I don't think the British people realise what cuts the military have had. And in the final analysis, for the safety and security of our nation, you need military forces.
How much of our GDP, if you like, should we be spending on defence in general? What is it, around 2% at the moment? Some people say it should be more like 3%. Other people, of course, would say it should be less than 2%.
Well, I mean, that's a difficult debate, because how long is a piece of string? I mean, my own feeling is we need to spend more. We need to spend what you should spend for the force we assess is capable. At the moment, a lot of people are suggesting that's around 2.5% to 3%. That may be right, but certainly it's more than is being spent at the moment.
So your message finally to the Prime Minister, to the rest of the Cabinet is don't mess with the Marines?
Absolutely. The loss of the amphibious capability would be a huge loss to Britain's military capability, and I'm sure at some stage in the future we would really regret it. And you can't build these things up again suddenly. I mean, they are really difficult to build capabilities like that, and our Royal Marines provide half of our Special Forces people. You know, a very important aspect of our military capability.
All right, thank you so much for coming into the studio. Lord West, former head of the Royal Navy, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Now, Darkest Hour, a film depicting Winston Churchill during the war, has been nominated for 9 BAFTAs and 6 Oscars, and the makeup team that transformed Gary Oldman into the Prime Minister are among those hoping to win an Academy Award. Brennan Nichols has been along to meet him.
You cannot reason with a tiger when your head is in its mouth!
Gary Oldman's performance in Darkest Hour has already earned him many accolades and critical acclaim. Turning him, though, into Britain's wartime Prime Minister has been hailed as a masterpiece of makeup.
Gary would come into the bus, we shave his head, apply the makeup. It takes just over 3 hours to apply the makeup and the wig, plus including getting into his fat suit and costume, it's close to 4 hours for the entire thing. He'd then go to set for 10, 12 hours a day filming, and we need to be there the whole time to maintain his makeup throughout that. He would then have his makeup removed, which takes an hour, and then once he goes, Lucy and I stay for another hour or 2.
Gary Oldman convinced Katsuhiro Tsuji to come out of retirement to design the Churchill makeup. Having just been working with David on another movie, it was Oldman that asked him to be on set applying it alongside colleague Lucy Sibic. And it's the 3 of them that have been nominated for the Oscar.
I'm extremely proud. It's the best job I've done so far to date, and I'm just so pleased it's getting the recognition that it deserves, because of the amount of effort that myself, Kazu, Lucy have put into it, and as well as all the other people behind the scenes. You know, there's such a big team involved. You know, we're here now getting the credit, and our names are on the award, but the amount of people in the workshops that have been involved is amazing.
We are to receive our reward.
The 39-year-old makeup artist has a CV full of blockbusters to his name, but this is his first ever Oscar nomination.
Look at all this texture around here, lovely texture on Gary's nose, and the coloration, the broken vein work and stuff like that. You know, that's why just spending that bit more time prepping, that's why our days were so long, because I just wanted to make sure that I painted all of those pieces perfectly, you know, so that they match every day.
David flies out to Los Angeles for the Oscar nomination lunch this weekend. Then he's back for the BAFTAs before heading off to LA again for the Oscars themselves on March the 4th for what could be his finest hour. Brennan Nichols, BBC News, Buckinghamshire.
Right, just coming up to 9:30 is the time. Let's get a look at the weather now. Here's Ben Rich.
Hello there.